Hi everyone, welcome to our 10 to 15 minute video on Unit 524, Conducting a Management Project. I'm going to hand over to our tutor James, who's going to take you through the assignment. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Charlotte. Hello, everybody. So, 524 here is to actually conduct a real life management project. And what we kind of mean by this, to make it kind of simpler, is to identify a particular need your organizations might have, whether that's to do with innovation, performance improvement, some kind of positive impact around the place in the real world. And we're going to conduct some research around it and develop some proposals. It's like a business case for how we're going to get forward on it, really. But it's going to be based on your real organizations under real, genuine, authentic research. We're broken down into two different learning outcomes here, and we'll get straight into it. So first learning outcome is to demonstrate, how to plan a management project to begin with. And the first question is develop the aim, objectives, and scope of a proposed management project. As we go through the questions here, we'll tend to advise people just to mind three things as you answer the questions. The first is to make any definitions of key terms or key themes as you go through the questions, key words that are mentioned, just to make them really clear. Second is to meet the command verb, which is the first word or two in the questions. And the third is to use less is more. So only as many different arguments or theories or models as you need to do to meet the needs of the question. So we'll try and apply those where we can as we go through. Here we're going to develop the aim, objectives, and scope of a proposed management project. So I don't think there's anything there that we necessarily need to define necessarily. It's all fairly straightforward, I think. But you are asked to develop. And develop in our command verbs means that we're going to elaborate, expand, or progress an idea from a starting point, building upon given information. So develop requires us to take a starting point and then build it out is the key thing here for 1.1. And you're looking to then develop aims, objectives, and scope of a management project. Okay, let's break that down a little bit then. In terms of what that's going to look like, you might consider whether you have an opportunity to look in your organization for innovation, product or service development, how we solve problems better, how we improve performance in some way, new market development, improve strategy, improve some kind of internal processes. You might talk about improving engagement. It's a common problem in the workplace today. We want a very specific aim here. So that's going to be develop it out. It helps to develop if you can identify where you think the pain points and the problems are right now. What's not working well in your organization that you think we might want to pay attention to and try to improve for real benefit. So develop kind of implies that what's broken or suboptimal, not working really well now in your view. We're going to develop from that problem out into, okay, what do we want to do then? What we're going to try and focus on to try and improve that thing. So that brings you an aim. Objectives could include what kind of hypothesis do you have then off the back of your kind of initial considerations, and what might deliverables look like? So what might be the end result of this, do you think? What might be good? What might good look like as a result of the implementation of your project ultimately? Just make sure you covered aim, objectives, and scope within your answer here. That developed out from real world pain points or problems or issues or risks you see around the organization. And then you're going to lay out the reason for the rationale for your management project. It's going to end up looking like very specific things on innovation, product development, profit improvement, efficiency gains, those kind of things is what the outcome will tend to be. Once you've got that, we're going to move into 1.2, specify a research approach for the proposed management project. You've got options here in what do you intend to do to try to approach how you're going to research this and build the case. That might include inductive or deductive method, quantitative or qualitative data or information, primary and secondary information. So we might want to get into, for example, for this particular topic, you want to talk to customers, you want to talk to frontline staff, you want to talk to executives, get primary information as the key stakeholders around the thing, and generally what's the best quality type of approach you could take for your particular proposal for what you want to do, what's going to work the best. You're going to specify that here, and specify, looking at our command verbs again, is to identify, state a fact or requirement clearly and precisely in detail. So it's going to lay out your methodology a little bit here. Then to further supplement that in 1.3, you're now going to specify the particular research methods you're going to use to collect data and information. Here, I advise you to define the differences between data and information. They're not the same thing, okay? So what the differences are between data and information, you could define that here as 1.3 to start you off. And then you're going to look at, okay, what methods would I use to try and gather that data and information for this particular project? You might think around questionnaires, surveys, interviews, observations, experiments, anything that you think might fit your particular case in point, and you want to try and think around the best ways you think to gather that data information that's going to be accurate, useful, meaningful for the particular project you've got in mind. I think as part of this as well, you might want to think around not just specifying research methods, but a little bit perhaps around what good practice might be around the research methods. So if you're going to do surveys, what kind of survey methodology might you want to use and why is that? There's a bit of art and science behind research methodology. So, going in with a 500-page multiple choice questionnaire for everybody might be the best approach if you want to actually gather information that's useful and relevant and authentic. You might use a combination of different methods as well, so that you're kind of triangulating interview with more broad-based multiple choice email type surveys. Are you seeing similarities between the two or different differences there? So just kind of think around what good research methodology is going to be for your particular case. 1.1, analyze the role of stakeholders involved in a management project. Here, a couple of things you could think around. One is to think around, identifying, and you might want to here define stakeholders for your project. Who are they? Where are they? And what level of influence or interest might they have in your particular project? So for that, you could use like a Mendeley matrix type approach and think about mapping your different stakeholders by power and by influence and by interest. You could do that in a practical sense because it's a real world project. Don't forget. Another thing you might use is like something like a RACI matrix where you're going to say, okay, for a particular project rollout, we've got these different departments or people with these different functions and map that out. But this is a practical map of real stakeholders, what their different roles are as your management project starts to get rolled out. So that helps you form an analysis, not just a list of stakeholders. Don't forget, it's not just a list. It's analysing the role those stakeholders will have in the management project. 1.5, examine the factors that need to be considered when developing a plan for the management project. This could include schedule and milestones, key deliverables, resources that might be required is a big one here as well. Any contracts required or agreements. That could be around data protection, could be around project planning tools. You might think around success criteria, any assumptions, some risk analysis as well, and how you're going to communicate throughout. You're not looking at listing every single factor you can think of, but you're going to examine the key factors that you think should be considered when developed. So when we're asking you to examine the factors, it's okay. Break them down in some detail. Let's look at what examine means. Inspect it thoroughly to determine its condition. So what is it about that factor that we need to really consider when developing this plan out? For your particular environment, what might be working on those factors in particular? What might be particularly relevant for you? What might be particularly important for you to bear in mind? That's the examination of the factors, not just a list of them. Once you have all that, we're going to move on to learning outcome 2. This is the actual conducting of your real management project now. I think the important thing is you might want to just make it easy by just doing a basic, this could be just a report. This is your report. This is your overall piece of work. But within that, it's important to make sure you've absolutely hit all the 4 different assessment criteria within that report. So we've got to conduct the research to deliver the project. So you've got to actually do the research you've laid out in the first learning outcome. So real facts and figures and data that comes into this. Okay, you've got to do that, conduct the actual research. Once you've got the actual evidence and data and information in there, then you're going to move on to 2.2 somewhere in your report to analyze and interpret the findings using tools and techniques. So it could be statistical management, for example. It could be framework analysis, triangulation. There should be something in there that shows that you've taken the base data, the raw information, and done something useful with that to interpret what the findings really mean. Also within your report, there should be some analyzing options based on that information that help you to meet the overall project aim. So we wanted to improve efficiency. This is the information data that we gathered and some of the veracity and some of the problems and some of the real wins within that. Based on that information, then what might we do? What options have been generated from the data information research we've conducted? And you've got to analyze those options. So ideally, you've got more than one option, but fewer than 5. You might have 2, 3, or 4 different options that have been generated from the research and data information you've acquired through that process. You're now going to use those findings to analyze options in some detail. Again, break them apart. What options have we generated from the initial research phase? What do they each mean? And then in 2.4, we're going to select particular options for progress from the ones we've generated on the research phase. You're going to decide what to do and what not to do, put some rationale behind that, and put some recommendations forward. So here, you might want to, over 2.3 and 2.4, achieve that through cost-benefit analysis, really making a strong business case, identifying some key performance indicators throughout that we could look at. And then overall, throughout that as well, think around some limitations, some of the things we still don't know, the things that might require some further investigation. So it's useful in a research project like this to identify within the report where you think the failings might be, where you're not so happy with the research we've done, and where the findings might be, some further follow-up we might need to do in the future. We've all got limitations. We've not got full appreciation of anything, really. We've got to identify where the gaps might be. But you're still going to here have a sharp end of the stick, which is what you're going to propose we do, what the resources required to do it would be, what the intended impacts and benefits might be of that overall, okay? What leadership support might be needed to make it happen. Are you going to recommend you do a whole organizational big change on something, or maybe pilot or trial or test something further? Are we going to dig into some further research and information along the way to try and support how we're going to know what to do for the best? A good piece of work on the first learning outcome on the basic building blocks of research methodology and what you'd intend to do and why, and the basic premise of what you're trying to solve for, the problem you're trying to solve for. And in learning outcome 2 is building out a solution to that problem in structured terms with risks and with limitations notified along the way. But ultimately, what's your recommendation? What's the business case for it? What's the impact versus the cost and resources needed? And how might we know success once we roll this out? This is the kind of basis of the research project.
Thank you very much, James. We hope that you found that helpful. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us on cmi@inpd.co.uk, and we look forward to receiving your assignment soon. Thanks, everyone.